Hello, everyone. I'm glad to be here. It's been a long time since we've been able to see real faces and do such presentations, so it's nice to finally see people again. I'm the head of product at the Marque, but I tend to wear several hats. So I will be wearing slightly another hat today as an architect and also a board member of the Readium Foundation. And so I'll try really to make it not too technical. I think it can be frightening, open source, SDK. So I'll do my best not to scare people too much with technical words. One comment for Marque, we have the Château Frontenac in red. We should have the Eiffel Tower in red too pretty soon. That's a side project we need to do. So what is Readium? So Readium was created in 2013 as an open source foundation. And I would say that the primary reason why Readium was created is that we had this spec, EPUB 3. And EPUB 3 was just a spec. There were really no implementation. And we kind of wanted to nudge people. You know, EPUB 2 is fine, but you know, there's this other thing. And it can work with video and interaction and all that stuff. So initially, Readium was really created as a way to showcase that, yes, EPUB 3 is a real thing. But over time, our mission statement and what we do at Readium has evolved quite a lot. And I'm going to be reading exactly our mission statement. Let's be mission statement. Our mission is to foster the development of an open and modern collaborative playground for digital reading technologies. So you can imagine how much time we spent writing that. And actually, I think we shouldn't keep it that way. And increasingly, I think we should say that it's a playground not just for digital reading, but for digital publishing in general. And I hope that by the end of the presentation, you'll be convinced that Readium, yes, it's about reading, but it's not just about reading. So we have a number of projects. I'll be focusing mostly on two of them, because you've already heard a lot about LCP, and I'm glad that LCP is working so well now. One project I'll be really focusing on is what we called Readium Mobile, which is basically what we call toolkits, Swift toolkits. So 2 years ago, this would have just showed iOS. But now Swift Toolkit is actually something that covers iOS, iPadOS, macOS. More on that in a few slides. And we also have another toolkit, which is the Kotlin toolkit. Same thing. 2 years ago, I would probably have talked only about Android, but increasingly, it's also about Chrome OS and Windows 11. So, for example, the apps you saw in Italy and Spain, that's what they're based on. They're based on these toolkits. Another project at Readium is Readium Desktop. So Readium Desktop, we have the maintainer in the room, Daniel. Oh, he's here. So he'll be talking about that a lot more than me. We also have, so Readium Desktop is what is behind Thorium. We also have Readium Web. It's kind of new. We've been talking about it forever. It never really happens. But this time you'll see that it is happening. And finally, the last project we do is a bit less reading-oriented. It's LCP. You've already heard about that quite a lot. So what's new in Readium Mobile? Because I think last time we did a presentation about Readium Mobile was 3 years ago. Well, actually, before we talk about what's new in Readium Mobile, I think we should talk about what's new in mobile, because there's a lot going on in the mobile space. So when we started working on this idea of new toolkits to make it easier to build mobile reading apps, we were still in a bit of a transition in terms of technology. So on the iOS side, for example, Apple was releasing a brand new language, Swift, that makes it a lot easier to create mobile apps. And next week, they'll probably announce a whole lot of other features. And the mobile space is moving very, very fast in terms of what you can do with those languages, with what you can do with those devices. And just keeping up with that actually takes a lot of our effort. But it's also getting easier and easier and better to create mobile apps. Another thing that has been moving a lot in the mobile space is that Google, which used to use Java for Android devices, has been pushing now Kotlin as the preferred language for writing application. And in the same way that Swift makes everything easier and is evolving and changing all the time, same thing is going on with Android. And then aside from the mobile language, we're also seeing a completely new shift and a completely new way of thinking how mobile apps are built. So it used to be you have to put things at a very specific pixel, and more we're seeing evolution in the mobile space inspired by reactive stuff like some of you might know React.js. So a lot of that inspiration came from the web, and more building UI for mobile now is not about just the small screen, but building UIs that can work on any kind of screen and is going to be adapted to whatever you want at any given time of day. So it's a brand new paradigm, it's a brand new way of building app, and it's also moving very fast. Same thing on Android, where we have a lot of new things going on, especially with the equivalent of Swift UI. But if I get a little less technical, and I think you'll understand that pretty easily, the mobile space is moving. It used to be something you keep in your pocket that would be like 5 or 6 inches, and that's all eventually a tablet at home. And now, more and more, it's hard to say what is mobile and what isn't mobile anymore. We have brand new devices, like here you can see a foldable devices that can completely switch form factor, that makes it easy for you to read. You can keep it in your pocket, yet it's a tablet. And you can imagine that this has a huge impact on how we're thinking about Readium Mobile. Is it still truly Readium Mobile, or is it something more? Another thing that's happening is that also on Android, we're seeing Android being adopted on smartwatches, tablets, TVs. And what used to be only mobile apps now have to be more than mobile apps. Mobile apps have to work on desktop. Mobile apps have to work on your watch. And it's a huge trend that keeps on building up and building up over time. Another big news that happened in those 2 or 3 years is if you have a brand new Mac device, so what they call the M1 device, you can actually run iOS apps as well without doing any specific or additional work on those devices. And even more recently, Microsoft has been doing the same. So if you're running Windows 11, they did a very weird agreement with Amazon for some reason. So they're using the Amazon App Store. But it's also possible now to bring your Android app to Windows. So I think as you understand, what we call Readium Mobile is evolving. It's evolving because it has to adapt to this new landscape. This new landscape where mobile apps can adapt to any device, where they can follow you on every screen that you're using. And this has a big impact on how we've thought about the project. Is it still just Readium Mobile, or do we have to go beyond that and adapt beyond that? Another big change for us, since we've made a big presentation about Readium, is we used to do technical presentation and tell people, yes, it's ready, you can use it, it's fine, it does what you need with EPUB. And we're in a very different place now, so we have this very useful page called Awesome Readium, where you can find everything Readium related. And a few years ago, you would have had something like, I don't know, 2 or 3 apps listed out there. But if you take a look at the number of apps that we have now based on Readium Mobile, it has really increased. I mean, I can't even put the entire list on that screen. I think there's like 28 of them listed here. But the reality of open source is we don't even know how many apps out there use Readium Mobile. We know it's at least 30, it might be 40, it might be 50, but it's huge. So we've seen that really it has made a difference, it has made an impact, and the 2 presentations you had before me is also a good example of that. So of course, when you have 28 plus apps, probably 50 or whatever, you kind of need to evolve in how you work together with people. So we've always had a close-knit community where people come every Wednesday and talk together, but we know that this is fine when you're doing just technical work, but if you want to create a community where people can come, can contribute, and can actually use what you're building, well, you need to think a little bit differently. So we've made a few changes and a few additions to the way we do things. So one thing we've implemented over the last 2 years now is we've created the concept of an RFC, a request for comment. So the idea is whenever we want to do a major change, major architectural change, or build an important feature of the toolkit, we now write proposal where we put them out there on GitHub, people can comment, people can provide feedback. So this gives visibility in what we think should be the evolution of the toolkit. So transparency, something written, accessible to everyone. You don't need to pay anything. You don't need to call anyone. You can have access to those documents, and you can have your opinion about those documents. And we value those opinions. Another thing we've changed is we didn't used to have good change logs. So if anything was added or if anything was modified, there was always a risk that you would miss the brand new feature we've released, or that you would have missed how you should change your app. So we've added that. We've also added migration guides. So whenever an app needs to update to the latest and greatest, they have an easy step-by-step process to know what to do. And this is kind of consistent with what I was explaining. We're thinking less and less in terms of platform and more in terms of how can we provide a toolkit where people can pick whatever they need to create solutions. And because of that, we know it was confusing that the code was spread across 10, 20 different repositories, so different places for codes. So we've been moving towards simplifying everything and having mono repos, which means you have all the code in one place for any given platform. And last but not least, if you have an international community, if you have people speaking different languages all around the world, well, we kind of need to prioritize good practices for communicating together. So more and more, we're trying to put everything on GitHub, where it's visible, it's accessible to anyone, and you can comment and say whatever you have on your mind. So that's one, and it's quite important to evolve the way we work together. Another thing we've been working on, of course, is new feature. And not all of them are end-user feature, but one of the most important things we've created, actually, or added to the toolkit, is what we call the Decorator API. So think of a book as like an empty canvas. You can actually draw things on it. And the Decorator API is how you actually draw something on top of a book. So some of you might be looking at me funny and say, are you scribbling in your books, or are you weird like that? But there are good reasons to do that, especially in digital reading. So for example, with the Decorator API, it means that if a user wants to highlight, we provide an easy way of highlighting, annotating content. You could draw, you can add a background color to the text you've added, or you could draw something in the margin. So it's a core building blocks that enable a lot of different end-user feature. And an example of such an end-user feature is that we've added the ability to search. So it's now possible in Readium Mobile to do simple search. And this also opens the door to more complex things like full-text search, server-side, advanced stuff like this. For example, one could imagine that you're a student and you have a lot of textbooks, and you also have, PDF that you're reading on the side. So this adds a concept where you can easily search all those things and potentially match the right keywords you're looking for on the right page. So that is a big addition as well, and it's actually built on the Decorator API. So you search text, and then the Decorator API is going to be highlighting whatever you're searching. And just recently, we've also working on text-to-speech. So we know that, for example, for accessibility, it is extremely important to provide a number of features. So some users are going to be using screen readers, but a lot of users also are going to be other means, other features available in a reading app. So we've always had good support for customizing text, for example, in Readium. It's possible to change line spacing. It's possible to change the font. all those things, but we were missing good support for text-to-speech, and it's being added right now. So the next release for Readium Mobile should also have text-to-speech available. But we like to do more than just books. So I've used this picture of Rémi Bricard to illustrate our line of thinking of what we want to do with the toolkit. And we kind of want to do it all. And we're like, yes, EPUB is cool, but we think that it's not enough, and we could do a lot more in the toolkit. And we've seen that, for example, with the need of magazine, newspaper, and all. So what does that mean? In addition to EPUB, more and more we're trying to go beyond EPUB and to support more and more publication types. So one thing we've added is support for PDF with LCP, because we love LCP. So PDF has been a bit of a challenge in the sense that it's not as easy to work with PDF as it is to work with EPUB. Apple has done a pretty good job at supporting PDF on iOS device, so this worked really well. Android, not so much. It's a bit of a shame, but Google is not that interested in PDF. So we do provide a pretty basic support for PDF on Android, a very good one, I'd say already, for PDF on iOS. But we're making it possible for people to connect whatever rendering engine they want to use with PDF. So there are other options that people will be able to connect. And depending on what you need to do with PDF, we're making it easier and easier to connect the best solution for PDF support on Android. Another thing we've been working on is audiobooks. So there was a question about, is it, I think that's you who asked the question, is it W3C? So we support both, but for LCP support specifically, the W3C profile doesn't support that. So we use the Readium variant, but we've implemented audiobook support on both platforms, on both toolkits. And it's very important that for audiobooks was also a bit of a challenge for us, but a different challenge, in the sense that it's really the first time we have to work with massive content. And massive content, sometimes you have bad data or a data cap, or you have low storage on your device. So it kind of forced us to rethink how we do things. Instead of being always in a situation where we download the content and then consume, this forced us to create new ways to interact with audiobooks and allow reading system developers to select what's best for the user. So sometimes it means streaming, sometimes it means downloading, and we've also made sure that you can transparently move from one to the other. So I might be at home, I have a good Wi-Fi, I start listening to my audiobook, but then, oh, I'm going in the subway, so I'll download the book. And we're making this completely transparent so that it's very easy to move from one to the other. So a bit of a challenge, but I think it's an interesting one because this will open the door for a lot of things for us as well. And we don't want to just keep that limited to PDF and audiobooks. More and more, we're also focused on bande dessinée, comics, and manga. I should have added webtoons here because webtoons are big. So we already have some support for those image-based formats, but we know that we can go beyond that, and we know that there's the same need to move beyond streaming and download for comics and manga and all. So that's something we have on our radar, and we're really focusing on. And of course, if we work on those things, it will be with LCP as well. So what's next for Readium Mobile? I'm going to be talking about the very, very short term, but we have a few very interesting things, actually, especially in accessibility on the short term. So one thing we've started working on, we actually already have a PR at least for the abstract model, is we want to work on accessibility metadata. So we know that accessibility metadata are really hard for a number of people, including reading system developers. And as in all things Readium, we want to make it easier to interact with those metadata. So we're taking a bit the best of Onyx and schema.org and all those vocabularies, and we're creating an abstract representation that should encompass all the accessibility metadata, so that as a developer, you don't need to think about all those complexity, and we'll we'll create an easy abstract representation of that. And hopefully that means that we'll have better presentation and better use of those metadata in reading apps. Another thing we want to focus on is a better support for screen readers. So on mobile, it can be sometimes a bit of a struggle for screen readers to implement a number of things, especially since we're working with web views. And we really want to make that a top priority to make sure that Readium Mobile is as accessible as possible for screen readers. So that's a big focus for us this summer. Another thing we have incoming is support for media overlay. So text-to-speech is nice, screen readers are nice, but if you have a real human reading a book and you have that narration at the same time as you're reading, it's even better. And we've been thinking about that for a long time. We were wondering what is going on at W3C, are they changing anything? But since it doesn't seem to be the case, we're going to be implementing media overlay as it exists currently in EPUB, and that should be around end of the year, early next year, I think. And last but not least, we know that we need to do a better job at documenting. So developers, not always big fan of documentation. You know, we like to do code or create new cool stuff, but we're aware that with that many people out there using the SDK, the toolkits, we also need to have more documentation. Oops. So I'm going to talk about another project also pretty quickly. So Readium Web, it's something you might have heard, you know, a bunch of time, like, yes, we're also interested in building something for the web, but what I want to say today is this time it's real. You know, we're really building it. It's not just something we want to build. We are actively working on this. And interestingly, you can forget that, but I put it anyway. That's the architecture of Readium. And since the very beginning of Readium, we've always designed Readium to be on the web. So it's kind of funny because the first prototype were actually web prototypes. And even though we had web prototypes, we ended up building mobile apps. But from the very beginning, so a few years ago, everything was already designed in a way where you could have a server, a client, and not just read on a device using native code, but also with a web reader anywhere. So one thing to keep in mind is we've always had that, but somehow we never managed to do it. And we've reached a point where we're finally building this. So we started by creating a brand new toolkit, which is the Go toolkit. The gopher is pretty cute. It's the mascot for Go. I like it much. And basically, what we're doing is the exact same architecture as Readium Mobile. So we're not trying to reinvent the wheel. We're just creating building blocks so that on the server, everything we do on mobile, we can also do it to serve content publication on the web. So it's pretty simple if you think about it. The main use for that is to create what we call a publication server. So it takes an EPUB, it ingests an EPUB, and as an output, you get a Readium Web Publication manifest. And you can think of that basically as your book becomes an API. So instead of being a zip where it's hard to access stuff, it puts your book on the web and makes it possible to interact with the book. So the most basic interaction you can have is what are the metadata, what is the table of contents. But this is only the beginning, and we think we'll be able to create more interesting APIs like I want an index of the interesting terms, or I want to search the book. So really think of this as it's no longer just a book, it becomes an API in a way. And we also think this has a lot of potential that goes beyond reading, and I'll talk a bit more about that at the end of the presentation. So the Go toolkit is basically what you have on a server. And then on the other side, we have what we call the TypeScript toolkit, which is the client side. So it's fine to have an API, but you also need something to consume that API. You need the ability for a reader to interact with the book, not just get JSON out of it. So the TypeScript toolkit is meant to do that. It's meant to be a building block for people creating web readers that they can use and that implements the Readium architecture. So the Go toolkit outputs a manifest. The TypeScript toolkit is using that manifest and will present that to the reader. So we started with something that we could say are mostly building blocks, but we've started by implementing what we call navigator modules. So it's Basically, think of a chapter as a lot of columns next to one another, and we have to do stuff like put you on the right column when you paginate. So that's one of the things that the Navigator modules do. But we've also started working on what we call the Navigator, which is the part of the code that displays the content. So, for example, that shows the chapter. And increasingly, we're going to have both sides talking to one another. And the goal is very simple. The goal is we want to do exactly the same feature set as Readium Mobile. So the same way that Readium Mobile supports EPUB, PDF, audiobooks, text-to-speech, all those things, we're implementing all those same features also on Readium Web. And it's not just that it implements the same feature, is more and more we're sharing code between the two. So, oh, not working. So here's a quick look at an early prototype. So it's still a prototype, that's what we're working on. But yeah, you can see it's basically a book. You have 2 pages next to one another. You can add bookmarks. You see where you are in the book. You have a progression slider. Nothing special, but that's the goal. The goal is we want to create the building blocks that makes it super easy for people to create mobile reading app, web reading app, desktop reading app. Prototype, I think it'll be even more cooler when we show this next year. But it's going in the right direction. So I've said building blocks quite a lot. And I think we need to really rethink even how we imagine or talk about Readium. So initially, I was talking about Readium per platform, like mobile, web, desktop. But I think this division between platform is kind of disappearing. And more, Readium is really becoming like Lego. And not just, so first of all, Readium is not just code, it's also an architecture. There are a lot of projects out there that are not on the Readium repos, that are not on the Readium Foundation, but that are compatible with Readium. So that's an important piece. It's also a collection of open source toolkits. But the idea here is that we give people a lot of building blocks so that they can do things with them. And increasingly, there's not much any difference between those platforms. So all platforms tend to merge into one another. As we've seen, what used to be mobile is becoming desktop. The web part is also used in mobile. And so we think this whole concept of platform-based is kind of disappearing, and instead we're giving you a Lego set, and with this Lego set you can create a lot of cool stuff. So we've talked a lot about building cool stuff for reading apps, but it's no longer just about reading apps. With those building blocks that we provide, we can also provide tools that could be of use for publishers, for distributors, for pretty much anyone in the digital publishing industry. So an example of that is I want to inspect content. I have EPUB 2, I have EPUB 3, I have EPUB whatever, and I want to know what's in the content. Well, Readium could provide you a very easy way of doing that. You don't have to care about the version of Readium. You don't have to care about the publication format. We provide an easy way of presenting in an elegant way all those metadata. One potential use case, interesting for publishers, interesting for distributors. Another good example of that would be generating samples. So as a bookstore or as a library, you want to provide an easy way for people to, I don't know, read the first chapter or first 5%. Well, with all the code that we provide in those different Readium toolkits, it's definitely possible to also use them to do that. So instead of manually creating samples, you could definitely use that code to generate samples. Another good example of that would be packaging publication. So I don't think this was mentioned in the Media Library Online presentation, but the way that Media Library Online actually managed to prepare a collection of audiobook is actually using Readium code. They had a bunch of MP3s, and they needed to turn those MP3s into an audiobook. And to do that, they actually used the Go toolkit. So you see, I was talking about Go toolkit for the web, but it's also used for packaging audiobook. So it goes beyond that. Book as an API, I think this is something we've been talking about forever now, but there's a lot of potential. I think especially in the academic space, where it's not just about reading a book from cover to cover, Sometimes it's about searching for terms. Sometimes you want to be very specific about what you're into. And the ability for Readium to expose, to work with the content of a publication could enable a lot of interesting use case. Maybe TDM that you'd be talking about, other stuff like that. And last but not least, I also think we have a unique opportunity to use what we're doing at Readium to create a better format for BD, comics, manga, webtoon. So we know that even though EPUB is supposed to be designed for comics and bande dessinée, it's not such a good format for that. We see, for example, that in Japan, they're adding a lot of stuff on top of EPUB. We know that the market is going more and more towards native content for mobile reading with webtoons. And at least personally, I don't think that EPUB solves that problem very well. And we've been working together with Laurent and other people in the industry to do that, to create a new solution for that based on Divina. And this is also using all the things I've described. And just to be clear, these are just a few examples. So I think we have to do probably more work to explain and showcase that Readium is not just about building apps, it's also building blocks that make sense for all those different things in the industry. And I'm probably not creative enough to imagine whatever else you could do with that. That's it for today. Q&A.
Thank you very much. So great presentation, Hadrien. Just maybe some questions before. Do you want to adopt Readium today? Yes?
It's about the annotation you mentioned at the beginning. Is designed to be compatible with systems that exist based on W3C annotations group, or what about annotation?
So I'm not sure I heard completely everything. So I heard W3C annotation and...
Will we do something which is compatible with the W3C annotations?
Okay. I mean, it's definitely possible. Basically, we don't implement annotation per se. We implement building blocks that you can use for annotation. So for example, one thing we can do is we can highlight text, or we can search a place in the book based on text. So you have a sentence, you have the text before, you have the text after. We can work with that. So it's definitely possible to use W3C annotation model, as whatever you have in your backend, and then use what we've built to actually provide an end-user feature. So this would allow you, for example, to find the annotation in the book. This will allow you to highlight the annotation. So yeah, but we don't implement, it's not deeply integrated W3C annotation in the toolkit. But nothing's stopping you from doing that. It's completely possible given how it works and what you can do with the APIs.
Exactly. We've got an abstract model that is totally compatible with the W3C annotation model, with the notion of locators that can be several variants of how to locate some content. We add a text, and so at the application level, we don't do that. This memory object can be serialized in W3C annotations. And really, at the level of Thorium, at the level of the application that we are doing at IDEA Lab, we would like to obtain something that allows somebody to create his annotations, share annotations, keep annotations on the side, outside of Thorium, export his own annotations for sharing with friends or any kind of hypothesis system that exists. Something very flexible. Another question?
Could you expand a bit about using Readium for book as an API? I mean, what kind of, Readium would be the interface, the machine. What kind of content or structure will be addressed that way?
Sure. So the most basic one is we have this universal representation of what a publication is in Readium, which is called the Readium Web Publication Manifest. And in reality, we don't really care if it's an EPUB or a PDF or an audiobook or whatever. It's like the notion of a publication in our conceptual system, it can be anything. So that's the first API. You get the manifest, so you know all the metadata about a book. You get all the resources in the book. You get the table of contents. So that's the first layer. Then we have layers on top of that. So in the manifest, you can also discover what we call services. So I've talked about one of the services that we've implemented, which is search. So you basically get a URI, and I don't know, you want to search for dog in that book. You send dog to that URL, and it's going to return you all the what we call locators. So all the places where there's dog in the book, and pointing to chapter 2 or chapter 3 or chapter 5. But that's only one example. One can imagine that if you've added semantics in your books, and for example, you provide definition for terms, we could definitely build an API that extracts all those things and allow you to do that. You could do index, you could do dictionary, you can do a lot of different things. So what we've implemented so far, I think, were the most needed, the most expected features. But as we go more in the direction of educational materials, textbooks, scientific papers, I think there's a lot of potential to add some intelligence on top of that. You could do, so you could build a number of services on top of the content. And we're exploring a bit that. For example, personally, I would be super interested in building some intelligence on device on top of images and do stuff like panel detection or text detection, comics, because I think this could open the door to better user experience and a number of things. But really, the sky is the limit. The idea is, a book, in a way, is something that's closed, and I think the idea here is what can happen when we open the book, when we think about the book as not just something you read cover to cover, but a source of information and something you can interact with in many different ways.